Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another HeadHunters Northwest podcast. I am very excited to introduce you to Jeff Stawiarski, who is one of my good friends that I've been lucky enough to call a friend after all these years. Jeff and I met when he was working for, I don't even remember. Maybe I don't want to say, because I think I did recruit you from that place.
It was Vista Outdoors.
Okay. And you and I worked together when you took over a very large role at EOTech when L3 owned them and they were going to spin them off and sell them. And you were very successful in the role that you took. And so our friendship has covered many, many years and many SHOT Shows and many other organizations that you've worked with and helped. And now you're in a new role. So I thank you very much for being on this podcast. And I'm thrilled because you're one of the best leaders of people that I know. There's not a single person that's worked for you that I'm aware of that hasn't absolutely grown with their career and been appreciative. I know you're a great resource, a wonderful leader. And I think one of your talents is being a good liaison and mentor and growing and connecting teams. So when there's an acquisition, you know, you would be someone I would think to call to lead that building of a team. And I know you've had some great leaders and mentors you've worked with. So thank you for being on here. And why don't you just walk our audience through your career, but don't leave out your company that you built with your brother and sold, because you're an entrepreneur in your own right.
No, and Shailene, thank you very much for having me. Gosh, my career, I'm coming up on my 35th year in sales and marketing. Kind of scary when you think about it. But, you know, it all started, I went to Michigan State University, degree in marketing. And I remember that first job out of college. I was selling barcode system software in downtown Detroit. And it's when downtown Detroit was really bad. And my first year, I got held up when I was downtown making sales calls. I was out at the General Dynamics tank truck division, and my car got stolen out of the parking lot. And I still went back to work the next day, you know, with a rental car.
Wow.
But, you know, I think if I look at how my career has progressed and the exposure that I've had, I worked in automotive just because living in Michigan, you're going to work in the automotive industry. But it was around 1998 that my younger brother and I came up with this idea, and a lot of it had to do with his education in chemistry and forensics. We developed a line of scent elimination products that totally went against what the industry traditionally knew about, and it was using baking soda and water. We utilized colloidal and ionic silver, and colloidal and ionic silver is a known agent for killing bacteria. It's used in the medical industry, water purification. I mean, back in early medical days, they used to put silver, some type of silver drop in babies' eyes.
That's right.
And if you watched it grow, you know, the technology, clothing companies were using silver thread material in the textiles for odor control, not only for hunting, but for athletics. But we merely developed a line of scent control products, sprays, laundry detergents, body washes, all sorts of different products, wipes, using colloidal and ionic silver. And we were basically going head to head with Wildlife Research and Hunter Specialty. I mean, 2 strong acres in the hunting industry at that time. And we literally, in the course of a couple of years, just being diligent, being disciplined, not turning down any opportunities, we basically became a 3rd place runner in the entire scent control industry with Extreme Scent. Silver XP was the brand. And over the course of a 7-year period, we grew it. And it was in 2007 that we spun it off and sold it to Primos. And shortly after we sold it to Primos, Primos was acquired by Vista Outdoors. And
That's
I'll
right.
get
That
to
was
that.
fast.
It was interesting, but we had been published over 400 times. We made the front cover of Field and Stream, developed a great network with writers, the editors. We sponsored a NASCAR in the Busch Series, 3 races each year for a 3-year period, and utilized the car to help promote retail relationships with Cabela's and Gander Mountain, Jay Sporting Goods. Probably the best relationship that I built when I first got into the industry, and I still talk to him today, is Derek Naraki with Grandview Media. And Derek was new in his role. We were young and dumb when we started Extreme Sports Group, and we just kind of evolved into the industry. And I really think that this industry, as large as it is, it's small, and there's still a lot of really good people and relationships to be had.
Yeah.
But when we sold Extreme off, my brother went to work for Primos, and I ended up at Gore-Tex, doing a variety of different roles in military. Then jumped into gloves, garments, footwear, accessories for hunting and fishing. Was part of the team that came up with Optifade. A couple really great guys, Dave Dillon, Larry Abbott, Brad Yeomans, 3 guys that I worked with over at Gore. And we were all basically thinking about animal vision versus human vision, because you go to hunting camp and everyone's got their camo and it's like a fashion show, but really, how does the animal see it? And probably at Gore, best leader I ever worked for in my career at that point was Jim Baruti at Gore, and he's still there, probably coming up on a couple more years before he retires. But I got recruited away from Gore, and I went back into automotive, which was probably a mistake. But then again, it was 4 years of really learning how to lead big teams. I had a team of roughly 25, and although it was automotive, we got ideas to diversify, and we were doing private label for Primos, Remington, making all of the gun cleaning products, some leather care products for Gore, just, utilizing some of the relationships I had. And that was about the time, 4 years, they were getting sold. It was a family-owned business, and they were getting sold off. And I got recruited to go to work for Vista, which was kind of interesting since I had sold Primos to Vista. Now I'm here at Vista working with Savage and Federal and Hoppies and Butler Creek and Bushnell, and just a whole consortium of brands. And that's really kind of where the industry was going, is companies were just buying up all these brands. But yeah, it was at Vista that the leadership there, very mature. Todd Seifert was a great leader. Jim Bruno, who I still speak to, he's now the president of Bushnell and Shooting Sports. But it was Jim that really taught me a lot about sales analysis and analytics and how to use data. And data,
that was a big part of your job there.
It was a lot of moving parts, a lot of forecast. I was managing all of the big box stores for all 48 of our brands. So I had a lot of moving parts and people, and trying to understand line reviews and forecast. So, Jim really taught me a lot about that, and reached a point where the industry started to change, and Vista was going through a lot of its own change. And to be honest, I just didn't like where I was landing within the Vista umbrella. And then one thing led to another, and that's how we met. And it was in 2018 that you placed me at L3 Harris.
And that was a big job.
EOTech. Yeah, that was probably one of the more challenging positions I had in my career, because EOTech, great product. They suffered a terrible lawsuit with the federal government over thermal drift, this term that no one even knew what it meant at the time. But we had to rebuild a culture, rebuild a brand, the marketing. Jake Fambro, who is the director of marketing, who I helped, grow into this role. Just a great guy. We gelled well. And if I look at the rest of the team and the people that I brought in, I always stressed that your best teams are your most diverse teams, and diversity from a skill set. And we learned how to play off of one another. We knew each other's moves, tag teamed at trade shows and customer meetings. Had a great director of sales. When we revamped the entire channel process, and we dropped a bomb, and we instilled a MAP program, which kind of sent some tremors through the industry, and our reps were kind of concerned. But I think once it all just kind of leveled out, people understood why we did what we did.
And your role there, though, you were hired for the purpose of rebuilding that and getting it reorganized so that L3 could, goal was to sell it, right?
Yeah, it was in late 2019 that L3 announced that they were going to spin off 6 of the divisions, and EOTech was one of them. So I spent about 5 months with our general manager and our CFO. We were presenting to private equity firms, and they offered a really nice incentive to get people to stay, not jump ship, and see the process through. So I did that, and I left L3 EOTech in June of 2020. We saw through the acquisition and passing of the baton, basically. Yeah. And they brought their team in, and it was all good, and the timing couldn't have been better. I took July, August, and September and October off to take care of my aging parents. So nothing like parenting your parents. They both had some medical issues, and then they encouraged me to go back to work. And they were
sick of you. Let's be honest, they're sick of you. Your mother said, "Get back to work."
Well, I was putting in timeouts. I was suspending phone time, and they were abusing the family data plan. And, but yeah, that's, I think at that point, I was a little anxious, and I jumped into an opportunity, and I probably didn't do the best due diligence. And I would say, from a hiring standpoint or accepting a job standpoint, is to never rush it. If you make the wrong hire, you're going to regret it 60, 90 days. If you accept the wrong job, you're probably going to be unhappy and eventually become miserable. That position that I held for a year at Stawiarski Optics, good product, interesting culture, and just a really tough environment. Not a lot of product innovation on the optic side. And a lot of it was international and military. But then again, that's how you learn. I don't think I've ever not had a position where I didn't learn something every single day.
Yeah, I think you've been consistent with that over all the years. There's always things you learn. And I think you define the forever learner, right? You have one of the first things I remember talking with you about was, someday I expect to see you teaching at a university, because I think that's still back there, because you enjoy training and leading people and helping them do better.
Yeah, I would say, one of the takeaways, you learn from good leaders and bad leaders. Good habits, bad habits. But I think about what I've learned in my career. And, that's another thing. You never want to stop learning. And you want to volunteer for the good opportunities and even the shit opportunities, because it shows that you're dedicated, you've got passion, and that you're willing to at least try.
That's good advice for anyone in any career point that they're at. No matter what your career level is or what your industry is, volunteering just helps expose you to other people. It doesn't mean you have to spend your whole life volunteering. But if you took it in bites and maybe you volunteered for a year at one organization and then maybe moved on to another one. I mean, there's no timeline, but it's not a life sentence.
No, and I also think it's important, good leaders, like I would never ask one of my teammates to do something that I myself wouldn't do. It's like, I've been to restaurants before, and you see some guy wiping tables and carrying out a trash can, and then you find out he's the owner.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so you just perform at all levels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about your current role. So you're working for this really interesting company that I was thrilled you told me about, because while it may not appear to be in the outdoor industry, it really does have to do with your experience in optics and lots of other things. It is a really interesting company.
Yeah. So inside LPR, they're owned by private equity, and LPR is license plate recognition. So if you watch like FBI, Chicago PD, Law and Order, Blue Bloods, you're seeing and hearing all of this, all these acronyms, that they're, utilizing data to solve crimes and catch people and track them. Same with social media, facial recognition. I mean, I work with almost all levels within PD now, both local, state, federal. I get to work with HIDA, DEA, Customs, trying to do a little bit more work in military, specifically on the Air Force side. But we basically build these cameras that, cost about $7,000-8,000, and they get deployed in fixed locations. They put them on police vehicles, trailers, and all it does is capture data, and it feeds into through servers up into the Azure Gov Cloud. They cross-reference with NCIC hot list, and it basically just helps law enforcement with, interdicting drug dealers, human trafficking, suspects that might be felons, people tied to homicides, you name it. So I get to work. I've got programs going on right now with airports in Florida. Great group of people down in Miami, working up here in Michigan. We've got programs in Mississippi, Nashville, Minnesota, and it's not going away. It's getting bigger, and I hate to say that Big Brother's watching, but when you see what is going on in law enforcement, especially with they're having a hard time filling roles in law enforcement. You've had a lot of people retire or just get out of that type of role. The cameras are basically a little bit of a substitute for a seat or a role that you can't fill. Yeah. So, and then defunding law enforcement, in my opinion, that was not the right thing to do. But, they're using funds on programs like LPR, red light in speed districts, facial rec. Great product out there called Finder that utilizes, different forms of social media and facial rec to people. If you're familiar with 23andMe or the DNA test to find your background, they're utilizing that information now to solve crimes. So, I mean, it's almost like nothing is really secret or sacred anymore. But it's
what an amazing career you've gone from. Think about, where you started to now. I mean, you've just added to your skill set along the way, and you've taken advantage of opportunities. The role at, and I'm only going to pick on this one because I know the most about it, but the role from Vista to EOTech, you had a lot to learn there, but you bet on yourself. Yeah. And I think that's something that it's valuable for other people that are coming up in their career to be confident about. You don't have to know all the answers. You just have to know how to solve problems, right? I mean, is there any job you've gone in and not learned something?
I would say no, but I would also say that when you make a career change, you literally need to become a student of that industry. Latching on to people, learning about, the history of the industry, competitors, products. I always say the good, the bad, the ugly. You really want to know all that. You want to know who the leaders are, who the pioneers were.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I just, I think about one of the careers I had when I worked in automotive early on, I asked the vice president that I reported to, I said, I want to go work in a car dealership, because we were teaching customer service, sales, dealer finance. And he looked at me kind of funny. And I said, I'd like to go work 1 week in sales, 1 in the service lane, 1 in finance, and 1 in parts. Because back in the day when people used to go to dealerships, it was an experience. But I volunteered, and he thought I was crazy. But I'm like, if I'm going to be working with these people, I need to know what makes them tick and understand what they're facing every day.
Yeah. Smart.
Yeah.
I didn't know you did that. That's really wise.
I worked on a production line when I worked in automotive in chemical blending and packaging. I was vice president of sales and marketing, customer service, but I would go out and work on the lines on Thursday afternoons and meet everyone in the plant, understand more about the products. That way, when you're sitting in front of Chrysler, GM, BMW, it didn't really matter. You knew more about the products, the way that they were produced, lead times, maybe potential problems in manufacturing. And then obviously when you needed a favor, because we had to pull an order forward for BMW, I could go out to the line and go talk to the line leader. And he's like, oh yeah, this is the guy that worked on the line for, 8 consecutive Fridays and, rubbed elbows with us. So, it's knowing at all levels how the operation functions on a daily basis.
That's a great idea. We had Deb Kenny on the podcast, and one of the things that she talked about was very much like what you're saying. Even though she was in HR, she had great training at one of her employers by going out and working on the line and working on the floor and actually spending time working, doing those jobs before they had her go into HR. I think it is absolutely fantastic, because if we could take more time and invest more time in people to train them so that they understood every step, I do think that's a real value that I'd love to see more and more of as we're bringing up those next generations.
Yeah, I think that's important. And obviously maturing into, your career, you get to a point where I like to help individuals. And I think about a couple of people that I helped, one specifically when I was at Vista. He wanted to go back and get his MBA, and it required him to go to school on Fridays, and it was at University of Minnesota, and he had class on Fridays and Saturday. And he's like, Jeff, I can't quit my job just to go to class. So what we did is we covered for him on Friday, myself and a couple other people on the team. And I encouraged him to do that. And then someone else wanted to do it. So we just came up with a rotation. And I would also say that was one of the things I recommended when I was at EOTech, my director of marketing. He's probably a year out now from getting his master's.
Wow.
And it was really just understanding where you're at in your career, and then being able to help sort through to make it work. Because I have most employers, and I don't want to say most, but employers that will help pay for an education, take advantage of it. You just have to figure out how to juggle it.
Don't say no. So as we're kind of wrapping this up, I'd be interested to know if you started things over again, and we hope that we have hiring managers listening to this and people who want to get into our industry to learn more about the outdoor industry. And if you could look back, and if you knew what you knew now, do you have any advice for those people and what you've learned over these years and how they might utilize that, or things you would have done different?
I would say from a hiring standpoint, I'm kind of the guy that likes to roll the dice and sometimes gamble. If you lined up 3 candidates and just to say I worked in ammunition, and I had 3 candidates, 2 that worked in ammunition and 1 that did not, I don't necessarily look at, their last couple jobs. Are they coachable? Do they listen? Is it someone that you want to put in front of a customer? Are they dedicated? Are they going to take the time to learn and go that extra yard? That's the type of person that I look for.
That's great.
You know, a little bit more of like a utility player, and someone who I can move around, because I really think what's happening now, and I see it in my role today in the organization, you've got to wear 4 or 5 different hats.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think I said before, you know, my recommendation once you get that position is volunteer for everything. Try to move around and see all the different departments, understand how they work, and where you can be part of the solution and not the problem. And then you start to develop a little bit of a reputation as a go-to person. You know, and I think one of the, I guess on, you know, some feedback that I got is, you know, Jeff, you're a good salesperson. Are you great? I'm more analytical. I'm very process driven. But I find myself more so now being a stronger problem solver. There's problems all the time. And I always like to try to solve them quickly, because if you don't, that little problem 6 months from now, 10 months from now becomes a really big problem. And that's when I start knocking on the door of the president, and it should have really never gotten to that point.
Yeah.
So,
that's I think problem solving, it should in theory come with maturity, but I don't know that it does. I think it comes with humility, and also, you know, listening skills, as you've mentioned, which are very important. It's okay to not always be right. It's more important to reach a conclusion that is as close to a win-win as you can.
You know, and I would say I agree with that. Always be honest.
Yeah.
If you don't know the answer or you don't know how to fix it, just be honest. And then, you know, circle back with your team, powwow, try to come up with 2 or 3 different solutions, and then go back to the customer with what the solution approach is. They might not like any of them, but at least it demonstrates that, you know, you're trying to think of something that's in their best interest.
That's a really good point, because it doesn't matter if you don't have the solution. Problem solving isn't always about you being the one that has the solution. It's about going out and finding choices and drawing in your network or your team to help find out what the best solutions could be.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons, you know, you want to stay connected to people that, you know, you rubbed elbows with at, you know, prior employers, and, you know, connect with your old business leaders, because I'll call them periodically and just say, hey, I got this situation. This is the problem. This is what I've come up with. Would you mind if I explained it? And I want to get your take before I go back to, you know, like in this case, the commissioner at Miami-Dade PD, because you're going to get one crack to get his ear for 5 minutes, and it's got to be good.
Yep. Good point. Good point. Yeah. Well, while we wrap this up, I usually ask about what is someone's favorite firearm, but I might throw a twist in this.
Yeah.
I know you're a big hunter, and people don't, I think, realize that when they meet you, because you're always clean cut and always perfectly dressed. And I don't think they would realize or think of you as what they consider a big hunter. But if they've listened to this, they realize how much experience you really do have in hunting. So do you have a update for us about maybe a favorite hunting experience or a favorite firearm that you use to go hunting? Because I know you do quite a bit of hunting up there.
I do. You know, every hunting story has a story, and it's usually interesting. But I will tell you, I'm a loyal Savage firearms guy, and kind of a funny story. One of my favorite guns, I've got the Savage 20 gauge, and I've got a Bushnell scope on it. And in Michigan, the state is split, so you can hunt rifle north of one point, and then south, you've got to go with a slug or a muzzleloader or 450 Bushmaster. But I remember I was telling one of my engineers, Rick, over at Federal Ammunition, that Thanksgiving morning, I'm going whitetail hunting with a buddy of mine. He invited me to go with his church group. and I've hunted everywhere, but I've never hunted with a church group before. And they get together every Thanksgiving morning. One of the guys works for Starbucks, so he brings coffee and muffins and stuff. And their priest comes and they do a little service at like 5 o'clock in the morning over by the barn. And I thought, okay, you know what? I mean, I'll do that. And then since I was last guy invited, they gave me what they called the terrible stand. And it was the furthest walk. And they said, just follow the tree line. And it's a ladder stand. And I get out down the tree line. I get into my stand and I'm looking and I'm like, the tree line is about 15 feet wide. On one side is a swamp. And on the other side is a freshly cut cornfield. And I'm scratching my head going, you got to be kidding me. I mean, this is the worst stand. Well, that morning with that Savage 20 gauge, and I did get some ammo from Rick over at Federal. He shipped it to me a couple days earlier and told me what to use. I shot a whitetail at 190 yards with that 20 gauge slug.
No.
And I sat and I'm glassing this swamp in the field, and I call it 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and I come back and I kept on seeing what I thought were antlers, but I couldn't tell if it was the cattails blowing in the wind. And I decided to unhook my harness, which was not the smartest thing to do. And climb up the tree another 10 feet to get a better angle down on it. And when I did, I'm like, that's a deer. Matter of fact, that's a big buck. So I came back down and I figured out where I was going to shoot him. And I took the shot. It was about 7:30 in the morning. And I didn't see what I thought were antlers again. So I sat there for about a half hour and everyone starts texting, you know, hey, did you shoot something? And I'm like, I did. So they're like, let's sit until 9:30 and then we'll go take a look. And we walked out into the swamp and I ranged it at 190 and there is laying a 185-inch whitetail.
Wow.
Shot and I spined him. So that's how that worked. Now, I will tell you that I never got an invite to go back to hunt with these guys because they thought, well, you know, he worked at Federal and Savage and he's got Bushnell binoculars and it's, yeah. So it was a funny story. And my wife wanted the antlers for some design that she was doing. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm not mounting this, but I had a European done and I gave her the rack and she's got it in the dining room.
Is that right? That is really neat.
Pottery barn look that she wanted. And yeah.
Well, that's what, you know, that's what's great about our industry. It can be hunting, shooting, fire, you know, outdoors. It can be anything, all of those things, all those optics, everything, you know, gets all wrapped up into the same memorable event. And I think having those horns done, I bet you look at that every time and think of that story.
Oh, you know, it's funny. I look around my office and I've got a lot of different flight suits, flight helmets, antlers, pheasant, turkey, football helmets.
All memories.
Yeah. And everything's got a good story and a talking point.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And thank you for being on the podcast, Jeff. You are a great representation of that we want to attract people like you that grow into professionals like you. And I think, you know, anyone that has the good fortune to work with you or get to know you, it's just, I've never had a time that I went away from a conversation and not thought, what a great friend and what a privilege it is to get to know you. So thank you for being willing to be on the podcast and sharing all that with our listeners.
Thanks for having me, Shailene. I always enjoy seeing you.
All right. Thank you. Until next time, this is a HeadHunters Northwest podcast signing out.